My sister, Saeed, I'm not a real parent. So I stopped babysitting. Her kids. Being a single parent is never easy, but I've spent the past 6 years raising my daughter on my own after her mother passed away. My sister, Claire, often asks me to babysit her 3 kids, and while I try to help when I can, it's starting to feel like an expectation rather than a favor. But when I finally set a boundary and said no, she hit me with a comment that cut deep, insisting that I don't have real responsibilities as a parent. That's when I decided I'd had enough. Now she's furious, and my family is taking sides. Being a single parent is never easy, but I've spent the past 6 years raising my daughter on my own after her mother passed away. My sister, Claire, often asks me to babysit her 3 kids, and while I try to help when I can, it's starting to feel like an expectation rather than a favor. But when I finally set a boundary and said no, she hit me with a comment that cut deep, insisting that I don't have real responsibilities as a parent. That's when I decided I'd had enough. Now she's furious, and my family is taking sides. What stings the most about Claire's words is that she has no idea what I've been through, what it means to raise a child completely on your own, with no partner to share the load, no one to turn to in the middle of the night when exhaustion creeps in. She has a husband who parents alongside her, someone who wakes up for late-night feedings, helps with tantrums, and shares the emotional and financial burden of raising children. I had none of that. I became a single father the moment my daughter took her first breath. I remember the sheer terror I felt when I held my newborn daughter in my arms, realizing that from that moment on, it was just the 2 of us. There was no one else to wake up at 3 a.m. when she cried, no one to take turns changing diapers, no one to reassure me when I second-guessed every decision. I learned how to swaddle her by watching YouTube videos at 2 a.m. I figured out how to soothe her colic by trial and error, rocking her in my arms for hours on end. Every milestone, her first word, her first step, her first day of school, I celebrated alone, always wishing her mother could have been there to see it too. Despite the hardships, I wouldn't trade being her dad for anything in the world. She is my reason for pushing through the exhaustion, my reason for working long hours, my reason for making sacrifices. And I don't regret a single one. That's why it hurt so much when Claire dismissed my experience as if it was somehow less valid because I only have 1 child. As if raising 1 child alone is easier than raising 3 with a supportive partner. Claire doesn't know what it's like to sit alone in a hospital waiting room, praying your child's fever will go down because there's no one else there to help. She doesn't know what it's like to juggle work, house chores, and parenting with no safety net. No second pair of hands to step in when things get overwhelming. She doesn't understand that my responsibility as a father isn't any less just because I have 1 child instead of 3. But I didn't say all of this to her. I just told her that what she said was hurtful, that my responsibilities as a parent are just as real as hers. She brushed it off like it was nothing, like I was overreacting. That was when I made my decision. If she truly believed I wasn't a real parent, then she had no right to rely on me to take care of her kids. If my experience didn't count in her eyes, then she could find someone else to help when she needed a break. I love my nieces and nephew, and I've always been happy to be their uncle, but I refuse to be treated like a free babysitter by someone who doesn't even respect the challenges I've faced as a father. I love my nieces and nephew, and I've always been happy to be their uncle, but I refuse to be treated like a free babysitter by someone who doesn't even respect the challenges I've faced as a father. Still, that's exactly what started happening. At first, it was occasional, watching her kids for an hour or 2 while Claire and her husband ran errands or had a dinner date. I didn't mind. I love kids, and my daughter enjoys spending time with her cousins. But slowly, the requests started becoming more frequent, more demanding, and more last minute. At first, it was small favors.
Hey, can you watch the kids for a couple of hours? We just need to get some shopping done. Would you mind taking them for the afternoon? We have a meeting and the sitter canceled.
Then it escalated.
Can you keep them overnight? We have an early morning flight and don't want to wake them up so early. Would you mind taking all 3 for the whole weekend? We really need a break.
I didn't always say yes, but I said yes often enough that it started feeling less like doing a favor and more like an obligation. And the worst part? The more I helped, the less it felt like she appreciated it. She never really asked if it was convenient for me. She never considered that I had my own responsibilities, my own daughter to care for. It was always expected, like it was just assumed that because I was a single dad, I had all the time in the world. But that wasn't true at all. Raising a child alone means you don't have the luxury of passing responsibilities off to someone else. There's no, you take this one while I handle that. Every bedtime, every mealtime, every tantrum, every scraped knee, it all falls on you. And when you do get a rare moment to yourself, you guard it fiercely, because you know how precious it is. That's why, when Claire called me out of the blue one evening and asked me to take her kids for an entire weekend, I finally put my foot down. She and her husband wanted to go on a couples retreat, something they did at least once a year. I understood the need for time as a couple, but I had my own plans. It was supposed to be a special weekend for me and my daughter. I had planned everything: movie night, a trip to her favorite park, and even a little fancy homemade dinner where we'd dress up and pretend we were at a restaurant. Just a simple weekend, but something she and I had been looking forward to for weeks. So I told Claire no. I explained that I had plans with my daughter, that I couldn't just drop everything at the last minute. That's when her tone changed. She sighed, like she was dealing with a difficult child. Then she said,
You only have one kid. You don't understand what it's like to have real responsibilities.
Then she said, it felt like a slap in the face. After everything I'd done for her, after all the sacrifices I had made for my own daughter, she had the audacity to tell me I didn't understand responsibility. I could feel my hands tightening into fists. I wanted to scream at her, to make her understand just how wrong she was. But instead, I took a deep breath and said, if that's how you see me, then maybe you shouldn't rely on me so much. And for the first time in a long time, I said no. And I meant it. I could feel my hands tightening into fists. I wanted to scream at her, to make her understand just how wrong she was. But instead, I took a deep breath and said, if that's how you see me, then maybe you shouldn't rely on me so much. And for the first time in a long time, I said no. And I meant it. I expected Claire to be annoyed, maybe a little frustrated, but I didn't expect the absolute meltdown that followed. At first, there was silence on the other end of the call, as if she couldn't believe I had just refused her. Then came the irritation, disguised as disappointment. I felt my jaw.
Wow, really? You're seriously going to be this selfish?
She scoffed. I felt my jaw tighten. Selfish? I had rearranged my schedule for her kids more times than I could count. I had put my own plans on hold so she and her husband could have their breaks. And now, because I wasn't willing to drop everything for her again, I was the selfish one. Claire, I'm not your backup babysitter. I have my own child, my own life.
And I have three.
She snapped.
Do you know how exhausting that is? Do you know how much work it takes to juggle everything? You wouldn't understand because you only have one kid. You don't have to deal with what I do every single day.
There it was again, that condescending, dismissive attitude. As if my struggles as a single father weren't real because I only had one child. As if the sleepless nights, the financial stress, the never-ending worry, the exhaustion that clawed at my bones every day, none of it counted. Something inside me snapped. You're right, Claire, I said, my voice sharp. I don't know what it's like to have 3 kids and a husband who helps me raise them. I don't know what it's like to have a partner to lean on when I'm overwhelmed. But you sure as hell don't know what it's like to do this alone. She started to respond, but I cut her off. I've been doing this by myself for 6 years. There's no one else to share the load when I'm sick. No one else to help when I'm drowning in work and parenting at the same time. I don't get weekends off. I don't get couples retreats. So don't you dare tell me I don't understand responsibility. For a moment, there was silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Could picture her trying to come up with something, anything, to make me feel guilty. But I wasn't going to let that happen this time. I'm not babysitting for you this weekend, I said firmly. I have plans with my daughter, and I'm not canceling them. You're going to have to figure something else out. Then, before she could argue, I ended the call. I stared at my phone for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The anger, the frustration, the hurt. It all swirled inside me, but beneath it all was something else. Relief. For once, I had stood my ground. For once, I had put my own needs, and my daughter's, before Claire's endless demands. And no matter how much she tried to guilt-trip me, I wasn't going to back down. For once, I had stood my ground. For once, I had put my own needs, and my daughter's, before Claire's endless demands. And no matter how much she tried to guilt-trip me, I wasn't going to back down. I thought that would be the end of it, that she would eventually cool down and accept my decision. But I underestimated just how much my refusal would set her off. Not even an hour after I hung up, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. Then another, and another. You're seriously punishing me over one little comment? You know I didn't mean it like that. Stop being so sensitive. I thought family was supposed to help each other. Guess I was wrong. I stared at the messages, my jaw tightening. She really didn't get it. She didn't see that it wasn't just about this one comment. It was about all the times she had dismissed my struggles, all the times she had assumed my life was easier just because I had one child. It was about the fact that she saw me as nothing more than a convenient babysitter, someone she could call whenever she needed a break, but not someone whose sacrifices or challenges were worth acknowledging. And the worst part? She wasn't the only one who felt that way. It didn't take long before our mother got involved. The first call came that evening. I sighed when I saw her name on my screen, already knowing exactly what this was about.
Why are you being so difficult with your sister?
Mom asked the second I answered. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my patience. I'm not being difficult, Mom. I just told her no.
She's overwhelmed, honey. You know how hard it is to juggle 3 kids. She just needed a little help.
And I have my own child to take care of, I reminded her. I can't always drop everything just because Claire asks me to. Mom sighed, as if I was the unreasonable one.
I just don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. You've watched your kids before. Why is this time different?
I clenched my jaw. Because this time, she told me I'm not a real parent. There was a pause. For a brief second, I thought maybe, Mom would see why that hurt so much. But then she said,
Oh, she didn't mean it like that. You know how stressed she gets. You shouldn't take it so personally.
I closed my eyes, frustration bubbling in my chest. Why was it always on me to let things go? Why was it always my job to be the bigger person? Mom, do you know how hard it is to be a single parent? I asked quietly. Do you know what it's like to do this completely alone? To have no one to turn to when you're exhausted or scared or overwhelmed? She has.
I know it's hard, sweetheart, but...
What? I cut in. Why is Claire's stress more important than mine? Why is her exhaustion more valid than mine? Silence. I let out a bitter laugh. You know what? It doesn't matter. I've made my decision. I'm not babysitting for her, and I'm not going to pretend her words didn't hurt me.
You're being stubborn.
I admit. But for once, I'm standing up for myself. And with that, I ended the call. I sat there for a long moment, my phone still in my hand, my mind racing. The conversation with my mom left a bitter taste in my mouth. No matter how much I explained, no matter how clearly I expressed how hurt I was, it didn't seem to matter. It was always the same story. Claire's struggles were acknowledged, her stress was validated, but mine? Mine was brushed aside, like it didn't exist. I wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The worst part? I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, Claire wasn't done. She spent the next few days bombarding me with texts, alternating between guilt-tripping and outright anger. You're being so petty over this. I can't believe you're really going to let one comment ruin our relationship. Mom said you're being ridiculous. Everyone thinks so, honestly. That last one stung more than I wanted to admit. Everyone thinks so? It was classic Claire, trying to make me feel like I was the problem, like I was the unreasonable one. But for once, I wasn't falling for it. I knew exactly what this was. She wasn't upset about my feelings being hurt. She wasn't even really mad about me saying no. She was mad because, for the first time, I had set a boundary. And she didn't like that. For years, I had been the reliable, available younger brother who could step in whenever she needed. I had made sacrifices for her kids, rearranged my own schedule, and taken on responsibilities that weren't mine, all because I cared about my nieces and nephew, all because I thought I was helping. But now I realized something. Helping should be a choice, not an expectation. And Claire? She expected. She assumed. She took. She never once considered what it might cost me. I wasn't mad that she needed help. I was mad that she didn't respect me as a parent, as a person, that she could so easily dismiss my challenges while expecting me to step in and ease hers. So, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be her babysitter anymore. I wasn't going to drop everything at the last minute just because she expected me to. And most importantly, I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, convince me that I was anything less than a real parent. I had raised my daughter alone for 6 years. I had been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every doctor's visit, every late-night fever. I had done it all alone, without a partner, without backup, without anyone to shoulder the burden with me. That didn't make me less of a parent. If anything, it made me more of one. So when Claire sent one final text, "I hope you realize how selfish you're being," I didn't respond. I put my phone down, took a deep breath, and turned my attention to the only thing that mattered, my daughter. She was sitting on the floor, coloring, completely oblivious to the drama that had unfolded over the past few days. When she noticed me watching, she grinned. She held up a drawing of the two of us.
Daddy, look! I made this for you!
She held up a drawing of the two of us, hand in hand, smiling, surrounded by little hearts. And in that moment, everything became clear. I wasn't a babysitter. I wasn't a backup plan. I was her dad. And that was the only thing